Okay, so welcome everyone. Today we are live with Sarah Myerson. Is that how you pronounce your
Yep.
surname? Yep.
People do all sorts of things, but that's the best one.
Okay, brilliant. Now, Sarah is currently in New York, so it's about 8 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, 8 o'clock over there. Apologies to everyone. I forgot about our time change in Sydney. So if you missed out or you're like, what's happening? So anyway, if you missed our session, it is still available on after we finish our session. So by all means, you are able to always come back to the video itself. So let me just introduce Sarah. I know her from SydneyCon where we studied together. So Sarah sent me her bio. Let me go through it. Let me know if I miss anything. Now, after we left, to be honest, I didn't realize that Sarah was not Australian. Well, I'm an international student as well, or was an international student myself. So, it was a whole new place to be in Australia itself. So Sarah is currently an ordained cantor. Is that how you
Yep.
pronounce it? She's a
Yep.
musician. She's a dancer based in Brooklyn, New York. So, like I said, she graduated with a Bachelor's of Music in Composition at the SydneyCon and a Master's in Sacred Music and a Diploma in Hazan. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes. Wow, you are on a
Hazan.
roll. Amazing.
Yep, at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. So she is currently a member of the Cantor's Assembly, the
That's my
American.
professional union.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The American Society of Composers, the authors and performers of
Yeah. So you know how there's APRA
yep.
AMCOS in Australia?
Yes.
There's ASCAP in the US. There's also BMI and some other ones, but ASCAP is the main one for licensing and
All
copyright and
right.
all that sort of
Okay.
stuff. Yeah.
And that's
And they give
main.
you discounts on car rentals.
Oh, nice. Wow. Okay, cool. All right. And she does a lot of writing, composition, arrangement. Um and she's with the orchestra as well as the choir and what is this, and the Yitzhak Festival of the New Jewish Music.
Yeah, that was a commission. So that's a festival of new Yiddish music, which is pretty unusual because when most people think of Yiddish, they have this sort of very nostalgic idea of 100 years ago in Europe.
Right.
And it's really important to keep creating new music in the
Oh
language and the
yes.
tradition and the idiom so that it doesn't just become a museum piece.
Yeah.
So we wrote a totally new song for this festival and recorded it, and that was a lot of fun.
Oh wow. Okay, that's
Yeah.
interesting. So if anyone would like to know more about Sarah, you can visit her website on cantorsarahmyerson.com. So CantorSarahMyerson.com. And I will leave it down at the comments at the end. I don't think anyone's gonna remember that. Okay,
No.
so the reason why we've got Sarah is so I am currently a book author of some music theory books, and I am venturing into the world of composition or teaching composition. And Sarah, being a composer, performer, and all the above that I just mentioned, I thought, hang on a second, there are lots of teachers out there that will be interested in teaching composition or teaching improvisation, which is definitely not my forte itself. So, Sarah, would you like to share in terms of what you can advise us as music teachers around the world?
Yeah, I would say so, with a bit of humility, because I am not a classroom music teacher. So I know that you have to deal with the school syllabus and the curriculum and all sorts of things that you don't have any control over. And so I know that it might be very frustrating to be a classroom music teacher and to have an idea of how you want to teach improvisation and creativity and to have to stay within what you're told you have to do. But I wanted to suggest a framework today for how we think about improvisation and composition and musical creativity, because I really believe that all children have innate creativity. They don't come into being looking for the rule book of like how to walk or how to eat. They have to figure it out as they go along. So we do have those skills of improvising, of trying things out, of things not going the way we expect and having to adapt. And certainly that is a thing in music as well. Kids sing, they make up little tunes, they improvise, they make up words, they make up sentences, you know, especially when they're learning to talk and they don't know how to do it. It just comes out of them. And I think it's always a challenge when we're teaching things like music theory and, you know, how to correctly play an instrument and how to correctly sing, how to sing in tune, all of that sort of stuff. We are placing certain limitations on children's natural inclinations. So the question becomes, how do we give them the tools that things like music theory can offer, while at the same time not quenching their ability to improvise?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
And that's the thing, like you said, like kids are quite creative in the sense of them, you know, discovering new things. But as teachers, I think we're used to the fact that we're always correcting things. And like the word that you use, restricting them from, you know, expanding their creativeness. But the thing is, as music educators, like we're so used to that kind of teaching and that kind of style that we're not comfortable in teaching composition. We're not comfortable in, I think, improvisation itself and the concept of it.
Yeah. And I know this from myself, even. I had to take a class at the conservatorium that we both went to in free improvisation. And I had learned classical piano since I was 6 years old. And I found that when I sat at this piano and I was supposed to freely improvise, I froze up because my muscle memory was so deep in there that the hands would fall into certain positions and scales, arpeggios, broken chords, all of these things that they had trained to do. I couldn't get the muscles out of doing those patterns enough to be able to freely improvise. So for that class, I would bring in instruments that I didn't play so that I wouldn't be stuck in those patterns. I think I brought a piccolo once and like tried to, I mean, you can try to figure out how to play it correctly. Like, oh, well, what notes actually come out with the fingerings? Or you can go with, well, this is fun when I move these fingers in this pattern. These are the notes that come out. The end part of that story is that I really did not enjoy that class. I was not ready for it. I didn't get the mentality of what was needed for that class, but I've since learned that I think a lot of the problem that I had with taking that improvising class was that I was so in the mentality of how to do things right and how to do things the way I'd been trained that I had to find these other ways of breaking out of those patterns so that I could improvise, when really I knew how to improvise. I knew how to, you know, cook a dinner without following a recipe. I knew how to find a way from the subway station to my apartment a different way because there was construction. You know, like I had the skills of improvising. I used them every day, but somehow when given an instrument that I had blocked out all but the right way of doing it, it was really hard. So I think one suggestion for teachers who are within a very narrow framework and who are wanting to balance skill and technique with creativity and improvisation is to talk about variation. So obviously when you're teaching a student to memorize a Bach concerto or something, or let's say a minuet, you don't want them to learn how to play it wrong. You want them to learn exactly the notes as they are on the page and to play them in that order. But there is room even in classical music for improvisation and for experimenting. What happens if you take this piece in 3/4 and you draw out the first beat of each bar so that it's twice as long? Don't do that in a recital, obviously, or an exam. But what happens when you have to think about how the piece is structured and add one element of variety? Maybe it's duration of the notes. Maybe it's trying to play it in major instead of minor. Maybe it's you're playing on violin and you're going to avoid the E string at all costs. So you're going to try and find other fingerings just to avoid that string, just to give yourself some different way of engaging in the music so that it doesn't become this rote experience where there's one way that it has to be done and you're only ever going to do it that one way, and it becomes sort of like An analogy might be, instead of looking for clothing that fits you, trying to change your body to fit the piece of clothing, which that doesn't really work. So obviously there are instances when you would need to do that. Like if you're a model on a runway and you might need to adapt your body to, I don't know if that's really how modeling works, but so yeah, for an exam, you might need to learn how to play the piece exactly as it is on the page. But if you're, as a teacher, trying to teach a student not just how to bring the notes on the page to the exam room, but to engage with the piece of music creatively and to put some of their own self into it, I think giving very small ideas about variation and these parameters of what are the concepts of music, how can we take one of them and make it slightly different in this piece, just as a creative exploration to make it fresh, duration, mode, articulation, meter, all of these things, those are very creative. They will totally make the piece of music different. They'll make the experience different, and they'll start to unlock this part of the mind that we're shutting down when we're learning how to do things correctly. So that's one strategy that I would use if you're a music teacher and you're trying to bring some creativity and improvisation into your classroom, to balance what might be a very strict curriculum.
Yeah, no, I actually like that advice, how you said to avoid like one particular string itself when you're trying to improvise a particular music kind of thing. I guess it depends on the level of the students. So, if they're beginners, then use an easier piece and work with the easy piece rather than picking a difficult piece itself. For classroom setting, I guess it depends on what you're teaching. If you're teaching guitar class, maybe you can, just play on one string.
Well, yeah. So if you're teaching a beginner class, it's so much easier to teach improvisation because they're not already locked into ways of interacting with their instrument. So if you're teaching a beginner, you can take the opposite tack where you take those concepts of music and you give a stimulus that is using maybe one of those parameters. And then that encourages them to really deeply explore that parameter of music and also how it feels on their instrument. So in that case, you might say, improvise on just the E string, and maybe some kid already knows some fingerings and they can play notes. Maybe someone's just going to go, maybe they'll bow, maybe they'll pluck, maybe they'll tap fingers. They'll do whatever they can do on one string at their skill level. So you might give, using one string, or you might say, improvise, when they're learning, this is the golden time because maybe they really only know two notes, open string and first finger. Yeah. So then they have to improvise a piece that's just open string and first finger. And that doesn't have to be boring. It can be, like long notes and short notes. It could be loud and soft, plucked, bowed. There's so much you can do with just open string and first finger on the string, so that can be a really fun way of also balancing the class, because how there's always one kid that's super ahead and one kid that just doesn't get what's going on. Bringing in free improvisation can help level a little bit, because there might be one kid who really knows exactly where to place their first finger, and they might be able to improvise something that has really clear intonation of those two notes. And then you'll be able to tell that kid that has no idea where that finger is supposed to be, and they're improvising and they're doing something else, or they're trying to find where the finger goes, and sometimes they're getting it and sometimes they're missing it. Gives you a good idea as a teacher of a group who is really where in what you've just taught, how much they've absorbed, who might need more attention. If you can pair kids in smaller groups, they can help each other. These are all good things. Improvisation can be it's like when you give someone instructions and then you say it back to me. So, if they were listening, if they heard what you said, and if they understood it. Improvisation can be a great way to say, we've learned these skills. Now let's play around with them, have fun, and see how much we've actually absorbed. Are we ready to go on to the next note? Maybe we're not. Maybe it's not that we need to work on it more. It's that we're going to have some fun and play around with it until we're super comfortable with that.
Okay. Now, this is a question I've been asked a couple of times. I'm not sure if you dabbled on it. Have you ever learned graphic notation or taught using graphic notation?
Yeah. Well, so obviously I did a composition degree in conservatory. So we had to study all of the 20th century stuff. But before that, I would say so when I was really little, I would hear music in my head and I could play it over and over and over again, and then I would forget it. So I realized if I could write it down, then I could remember it, but I literally couldn't read or write yet. So I developed my own form of notation that made sense, that helped me remember, because that's what notation is. That's what neumes were. If you think of medieval times, it was a system that was a memory trigger. So you would look at it and you would remember, oh yeah, that's how that one goes. It's the one that starts by going up and then down and then up again, you know? So there is
Do you still
that.
have those books that you've written? No,
No. I don't think so.
long gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't even know where to start, but
No.
I also don't think I would look at them. But I do use graphic notation to this day. So this might be a good time to say what I actually do and how I usually improvise, although it's a very specific context that doesn't translate exactly to being a classroom music teacher. So as a cantor, I am leading Jewish religious services, and they are mostly in Hebrew with some other languages. And it's a lot of religious text, and there are very specific traditions for how it is chanted. It's not, most of it is not read, it's chanted. And there's a very specific system of how that happens, kind of similar to Indian raga or Middle Eastern maqam. And even sort of vaguely like Gregorian chant, if you want to have a European lens, although it's much more similar to raga than to Gregorian chant.
So let
So
me get this
yeah,
straight for those of you that don't know what a cantor
yeah,
is. So cantor is like a song leader kind of thing. Is that how you would
yeah.
classify it?
So a song leader, we do congregational singing,
Mm.
which might be catchy melodies, or it might be chant, kind of like plain song or Gregorian chant. But there's also a lot of improvised text singing where it's just the cantor singing, or it's the cantor singing and everyone else is mumbling at the same time in their own way in kind of a heterophonic mess. That's the aesthetic. You
So
have
would I
one
say it's
person
quite,
singing loudly and then everyone
yeah.
going.
Oh, okay. So a little bit like I think the Catholic does it. Is that right? I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe.
I don't know.
I'm not an
Okay.
expert enough to say that, but so I am always improvising when I lead. I have a book that has the words, and I am chanting things slightly differently every time. And I'm looking at what the words mean, and I'm using the meaning of the word to inform the music that I make. So I'm not really thinking concretely about like, oh, I'm going to go to the 4 major chord here or whatever. I'm looking at the word and I am making up music within this very specific system that illustrates the meaning of the text that I want to convey in that moment, and also trying not to do what I did yesterday because I want it to be always fresh and different. There's not really a parallel to that in what you'd be teaching, unless you're doing like a multicultural class where you're supposed to teach the kids maqam or something. I don't feel like that's a thing, is it? No.
Well, you studied composition at the con. I would assume that you studied the Aboriginal no?
No.
All right.
No, not at all. That's a great question. Why did we not do that? That's a really good question. I have no idea, except that it's very Eurocentric, colonialist idea of what music is. So when we looked at graphic notation, we were looking at George Crumb and Penderecki. I actually got to work with Penderecki in 2013. Yeah, I sang his Requiem while he conducted it. That was really awesome. It was so crazy. We worked so hard to get all of those notes right in these crazy clusters that he writes that's not a very graphically notated piece. It's, everything is written out, but it should have been, because when he came to the rehearsal, he was like, you are trying too hard to get the notes right. Just sing. Whatever you sing, it will be a note in the chord. One of them will be there. Just sing.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's
Yeah.
quite different to what we used to.
Yeah, right. So I've studied European graphic notation, but the graphic notation that I'm more used to is Jewish graphic notation, where I'm going to hold this up super close. I don't know if you'll really be able to see it.
Oh, cool.
That's going to be totally meaningless to you, but the big symbols are consonants. And then some of the lines and dots around them are vowels. And some of the other lines and dots and shapes are musical symbols. And each of the musical symbols is a cell that is chanted in a specific way. And so I am literally always reading graphic notation.
Yeah, some of them look a little bit like notes.
Yeah.
Like,
so
I can't read that.
all biblical text is pointed. Every word in the Bible is pointed with one of these symbols.
All right.
Yeah. So when in Jewish services, worship services, when we're chanting from the Bible, we're using graphic notation for every word. And it's not 100% like classical. There is room for interpretation and variation and how you connect the symbols to each other. Mm-hmm. So that is a form of graphic notation that I use every day and teach. And then the other form of graphic notation that I'm using all the time, which I hope I can find in here. Oh yeah, I have these little cues to remind myself which tune is which. The numbers.
Yes.
This note has the names of the different composers or different traditions of the different melodies for this text. And then here it says not Nathanson. And because I couldn't remember what the Nathanson sound like, I wrote out the first couple of pitches. So that's a form of graphic notation I use a lot. I don't know well, that sort of counts. It's writing out the pitches and some articulation. And then I have things like this, where I write out the note names, because I heard someone sing it and I wanted to learn it. So I recorded it and then notated it in the words.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So those are very specific forms of graphic notation, but they're kind of cool. And you can do them for any song. If you have some text and you need to map how the music goes with the lyrics, it's very helpful to do that. It makes just as much sense to write the names of the pitches over the syllables that you're singing in the word version as it does to write the words into the music notation when you think about it. Although that's what we're more used to doing.
Yeah, I guess there's different ways of writing notation, whether it's graphic or symbols.
Yeah.
Compared to the norm of writing on a stave, I guess.
Yeah. And we're talking about graphic notation that's very specific, at least in terms of pitch and mode at the moment. But a lot of graphic notation of the 20th century is supposed to be more evocative or to encourage improvisation. If you look at George Crumb, for example, you'll see like pictures, and then you're meant to play the picture. I hate that stuff. It's just not me. I would rather be given specific musical parameters than be told play angry or play sad. That's the kind of thing that was happening in this improvisation class that I took at the con. And like,
all right.
I can give me a text and a mode and then say, bring out the majesty. I'm good. I'm there 100%. But tell me to give me a picture of a rose and tell me to play that. And this is where I'm lost. I don't know how to teach that. I don't know how to do that. And I'm sorry, I have nothing to offer there. You'll have to ask someone else who does that. I
think that's more of creating a story out of a picture, isn't it? It's not really I don't know. Yeah.
For me, it's too abstract. I need more concrete stimulus to be able to improvise. And I think part of that is personality wise. You're going to have some kids in your classroom who are not literally minded, who are very metaphorically minded, and who would probably love that sort of thing. And you're going to have some kids that are more absolute and literal and practical. Or, at least that's me in a classroom. And even in terms of improvising, I want to know, what are the rules? What are the parameters? How do I know if I'm doing it successfully? And you can say that's the wrong mindset to bring to improvisation, but I think we all agree that if you tell the class they should improvise and one kid takes their guitar and smashes it on the table, we all know they've done the improvisation wrong, right? Because they're not using the material as intended. But like, if you just tell people to improvise freely, there are clearly things that are still out of bounds, but you haven't defined what they are. And you also haven't told them what's within bounds. Like, does the improvisation have to have the instrument functional at the end of the improvisation? Because if it doesn't, you can smash the guitar, but if this is the kind of improvisation where you have to be able to still play the guitar after it, then clearly smashing it on the table is not within the parameters. And of course, then you're always going to have that kid that's like, hates rules, and whatever you tell them to do, they're going to do the opposite. And then that's a classroom dynamic. There are kids who want to know what the rules are so they can work within. There are kids that no matter what you tell them, they'll try and do the opposite. And then there are kids who are kind of like ignoring the rules and just doing their own thing anyway. And you have to cater to all of them and provide some sort of environment that encourages free play, while obviously maintaining some level of order and control and management of the classroom in a way that's conducive to learning.
Yeah, so setting up guidelines, but not too much of, like, giving them freedom, but not too much of freedom, kind of thing. So
yeah, and I think it's always better to tell them what to do, like, play on these two strings, rather than what not to do, like, don't break the string on your guitar, because then one kid is going to break the string on their guitar. Like, better to tell them what to do and have some kids push against that and have some kids follow that, than tell them what not to do and obviously have one kid do that thing straight away.
That's true. Now, what about, let's say we're teaching a group of students, be it kids or adults, that have no musical background whatsoever. How would you teach improvisation?
Well, they're going to be much better at improvising because they don't have the limitations that people with lots and lots of training in one area do, I would say. Although they might have a lot of hangups about how they like can't sing or are tone deaf or whatever they're going to say. So you mean teaching adults with no musical background how to sing?
Both. So like, what kind of materials would you use? Would you use percussions to start with, or singing?
That's a really good question, because you can't give them a lot of those parameters of music that I talked about, because they might not have a sense of what two pitches are, or like mode or whatever. But certainly we've all seen toddlers with a spoon and a pan making music. So yeah, percussion is a great idea. I think that's, the popularity of drum circles certainly speaks to that. They're not going to necessarily get a lot in terms of tone variation, but it's true that percussion sort of narrows the parameters for most people down to rhythm and articulation. Unless you get someone who figures out how to get tone from a skin or something like that. But yeah, percussion is a good way. I would say exercises that have to do with talking are also good, because we improvise talking all the time. So you can get someone to get people in pairs and say, tell your partner a story. And then that person has to tell someone else their version of the story or something, or all of these like theater games that you can do that are spoken. And then maybe you get them to sing the story instead. They've already worked on the text a bit, so they have a sense of what the story is. And now they're going to add some music. And we have inbuilt ideas of how music and text work together because we do it with pitch when we speak, even if we're not speaking a pitch dependent language like Mandarin. You know, in English, if the sentence isn't over yet, it's higher than when it finally ends. And I think there's certainly some people that don't hear tone in language and that don't communicate using tone. And I don't mean to belittle them, but I think for enough of us, starting with something we're really comfortable, like speaking and telling stories and communicating meaning that way, and then adding the layer of, can you sing it as a melody? That could be an effective thing. And people will feel silly, and that's probably fine for them unless they're too embarrassed to give it a go. Yeah, so that, if you don't have access to lots of drums for a whole group of people, I think singing and talking is the way to go.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
I might try that actually.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else that you usually use? Like, do you teach improvisation itself, or
yeah,
what do you...
so I teach this, Jewish improvisation to other people a lot. And I use different approaches for different students. I would say the two broad ones, one of them is presenting sort of building blocks, getting people to learn the building blocks, and then encouraging them to experiment within the building blocks and to slowly leave them and do their own thing using text. So for an example of that, there's a mode that basically goes, the first phrase usually goes something like yada da 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 da. The second phrase, if it's a sort of a continuing idea, would be something like yada da 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 dee. The dee being the only thing that's different really there, but it's adding emphasis and continuing the phrase. Then at some point, if you want to do a pre-concluding phrase, you would sing da da dee da dum, and then the concluding phrase would be something like da da dee da, or da 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 da, or da 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 dum. So this is a mode that has maybe 4 basic phrases, and it's used to chant a whole heap of text. So I would teach someone those phrases the way that I learned them, which is with words to make them easier. First phrase is 1 and a 2 and a 7 and a 1. Hi, cat. 1 and a 2 and a 7 and a hook. Up and down. And here's an ending. Those are the 4 building blocks of that mode. Then, once someone is comfortable with those, you give them a text. So in my case, it would be some kind of religious text. And this will be in Hebrew, so it won't really mean anything to probably almost everyone that's hearing it, but something like Yishabach Shimcha La'ad Malkeinu, that's the first phrase, but it could also be Yishtabach Shimcha La'ad Malkeinu, Yishabach Shimcha La'ad Malkeinu, something like that. Something, the first phrase of text with the first phrase of music. And then the concluding phrase at the end, and here's an ending. Melech Elchei HaOlamim, or Melech Elchei HaOlamim, Melech Elchei HaOlamim, Melech Elchei HaOlamim. Just getting them to learn those 4 motifs and then try and map that music. Oh, it's a dog.
It's a dog. It's not a cat.
I'm sorry. I only saw the ears.
Okay. Meow meow.
What's the dog's name?
Tilly. She wants to be part of this.
Hi. Well, dogs are great improvisers.
Yeah.
And they often sing along. If you get your singing right, dogs will sing along.
Yeah, she's not very musical.
Really?
No, she likes, like, out of all the instrument I play, she loves the strings. So she would stare at the strings, and then she'll stare at how the string vibrates and the sound coming out of the strings.
That's cool. Yeah.
No, every time when I'm on the screen, she wants to be part of it.
Of course. So she's a social animal then.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, I get what you mean about the like using words and working around with that. I think it's to use the right words if you're talking about teaching improvisation is using ornaments like what you were doing with that
Yeah.
itself, but you always end with that same note, don't you?
Yeah. Because it's the same as in talking, how there's a feeling of completion when you get to the end of certain motifs. You know,
Yes.
so because the music is communicating syntactic meaning. The whole point of music and song, I would say, not with like pop songs where it's based on a verse and it doesn't change, but with chanted improvised text, the the purpose of the music is to give you the grammar and the syntax and to show you which words are more interesting or less interesting in the opinion of the person that's singing at the moment in which they're singing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the opportunity to really communicate how you feel about the words with using the music. So that's one method that I use a lot to teach improvisation within this very specific tradition that I'm a part of.
Mm.
And then the other version I learned from my first coach in cantorial school. So the graduate school where I learned to become a cantor, where her basic approach to improvisation, as far as I understood it, was take 4 established versions, memorize them so that you can sing each of them, and then put them away, pick up the text, and whatever comes out of you will be some conglomeration of those. So rather than learning building blocks and working up, learning complete versions and then letting the mess jumble out of you. And I don't really know how this can be applied to the classroom. I've been trying to think about it since you asked me, because this seems like the thing that I am an expert at that I don't really know how to transfer to being a classroom teacher, because it's not like the closest thing I could think of was when you have theme and variations, and you have to learn the theme and you have to learn the variations exactly as they are on the page. But ideally, you want the student to be able to improvise their own variations.
Mm.
It's not exactly the same. It's not an exact parallel, but maybe you teach the kid the theme, and then before they learn Mozart's variations, they make up their own variations. And you look at, what are the elements that can be changed? Mode, duration, meter, dynamics, articulation, and you have them make up their own variations first, and then they get to look at Mozart's and see if his are more fun or less fun or just different or creative things they wouldn't have thought of, or maybe they made up the same one that he made up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I remembered I asked a jazz teacher in terms of improvisation, and that was during the time where I was interested in jazz, like instead of just classical, for life.
Yeah.
And I remember them saying, "Oh, all you have to do is just memorize how other people play." And I thought that's like hours and hours of practicing, memorizing how other people play, which I don't have that time to do, And then after that,
Yeah.
like you said, it's playing different versions and, merging them together, kind of creating your version of improvisation itself. But like I said, I don't have those hours to play on the piano, trying to memorize everybody's style of playing.
Mm.
So I guess in a sense, for me, building blocks does help, but everybody learns differently. So for classroom setting, I do enjoy teaching beginners because, like you say, it's so much easier to teach rather than teaching someone that is fixed in a particular way. So if you're going to teach an intermediate class or an advanced class, it's very difficult to get them out of their comfort zone, something that they're
Yeah.
used to. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. The model that I'm talking about with memorizing 4 existing versions and then seeing what comes out, or the method of transcribing jazz solos and then, like basically memorizing them and then stepping back and seeing what you can do in the style of Charlie Parker or whatever. I think that helps when you are not doing free improvisation, but trying to improvise within a style.
Yeah.
Because then there are very specific things that are within the style and not within the style. And it's really hard to absorb the style without having absorbed heaps and heaps of content. You kind of need to digest heaps and heaps of content before you can reproduce something that sounds authentic within the style. So if you're trying to teach a classroom how to do a jazz improvisation, obviously that's going to be on a whole different level than just trying to encourage creativity and improvisation and have them instill a sense of curiosity and free play in your students.
Yeah, so like you said, teaching free improvisation rather than specific genre, I think will be easier in a sense. Yes, Tilly.
Yeah.
Who's that?
Yeah, there is some truth to that. Although again, with free improvisation, it's harder as a teacher to really be able to adjudicate when a student has done it successfully or not. And, what are the grades? Is it pass fail? What are the parameters for succeeding? It's harder to do that with free improvisation because it can end up being very subjective to what the teacher thinks is musical, what the teacher thinks is creative, what the teacher thinks is derivative.
Yeah. I get it. Like when I teach something, I actually had a student asking me to teach composition to her, and she's a university student in China. And I said, lecturers, they're gonna have their own syllabus. Like you can't just ask somebody else to teach you composition because the way that your lecturer is marking will be different to the way that I, perceive composition itself. So yeah, it's a tricky one. It's like saying, how should a piece of music be when we know that during the classical period there was a lot of improvisation that has been encouraged during that period of time, while us playing those music in this day and age, no, we have to play it note per note and beat per beat. We can't actually improvise on top of those pieces that's been written. So it is a tricky thing to look at if you're looking into the marking criteria of itself. But yeah, let's just have fun in improvisation and just introduce improvisation to kids and to students, I guess.
It's also really good for broadening a program. You have to have concerts with your ensembles, with your choirs, and they can only learn so much content. And part of it you can fill by giving solos to the kids that are a bit faster at learning certain things. And so then, not everyone has to learn everything. But another great thing to do with ensembles is to teach improvisation so that they can do some of that in concert settings. I'll give an example from, I had directed the Caravan Choir. It was this fusion project of youth from Haifa in Israel, Palestine, and youth from Weimar in Germany. And it's, I'm not that old, right? But they were the youth because they were under 26. So there was this piece that we wanted to do with them. And I heard an archival recording from 1899 or so, I think. I'm going to get that wrong because I don't have it in front of me. But it's this woman singing this amazing improvised thing. And we really wanted to recreate that with the ensemble. But how do you teach them how to do that? And then, in addition to her improvised version, I found 2 other copies from 100 years ago of it written out as a song with accompaniment, 2 different ones. But by looking at those 2 other published versions and then listening to her version, I was able to sort of break it down into building blocks. I played them the recording and I was like, okay, like jam on that. And obviously they weren't going to do that. That was too hard. But then I taught them the building blocks and we broke it down into 6 cells of motives. And I had my 6 fingers. And so I taught them each of the 6, and then I would do one finger and they would do whatever that one was. And so we would practice putting them together in different orders and see what felt like it made sense and what felt like it didn't. And then we could talk about, how music goes together and how we have a sense of which bits make sense and which bits don't. And then my theory had been once they knew those 6 building blocks, that they could take those and improvise around them. And it was really interesting because the students from Haifa, some of them were experts in Arabic improvisation, either Quranic improvisation, or sometimes even the Christian students also have this tradition of Arabic modal improvisation. So like they hear the mode of the piece and then they're off, like they can improvise, and it's amazing. The other students from Haifa and some of the students from Germany were jazz students. And once they got used to the idea that they were just sort of improvising in a mode based on these building blocks and not over chord changes, they were good to go as well. And so we would have in concert, we would do, some version of the building blocks in some order. And then I would just point to students and they would improvise in whatever style and background they were bringing. And then there were some other students who were totally not comfortable with improvising at all. Obviously the classical students. And that was okay because they could just sing the motifs and make slight variations. And that was also an improvisation. It was also beautiful. So we ended up with this amazing piece that would always be way too long because it was so fun, and it would end up becoming like a 10-minute thing of, so we would sing the building blocks together, and then one student would improvise, and then they would signal that they were at the end by singing this one cell, and that was how we would know they had finished their solo, and then everyone would echo it, and then the next one would go. And it was really interesting because it wasn't a 10-minute piece we had to learn. It wasn't a 4-part arrangement that we had to learn. It wasn't a whole bunch of text that we had to learn, but it was a framework for improvisation, both group and solo, that filled time in a concert and yet wasn't, it gave space for free play within a certain parameter, while being a lot easier to sort of fatten the program than learning another 3 choral pieces, Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, yeah. Okay, cool. Now, anything else? Like, if anyone has any questions, please do contact me directly, or you can leave down a comment. Otherwise, I think we've gotten a lot of ideas from Sarah. Thanks for sharing.
Happy to share. And if anyone wants to know specifically about esoteric Jewish music traditions, you can contact me about that too.
Yes, I've left a link to your website, so if anyone wants to contact you, they can contact you directly. Thanks, Sarah. It's really
Thanks
nice
for bringing me on. It was good to talk to you.
Yes, likewise. We should meet up when we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully soon. I heard that the borders will be opening up for Australia very soon.
Oh, really?
So,
that would be fun.
I know. Can't wait. Well, stay safe and thanks for coming on. Have a very good night and good morning to everybody else, or good afternoon. And I shall see you. Bye.
Bye.